What if your career success is actually against God's will? That's a scary thought, but it's a question every Christian in the workplace needs to wrestle with. Because here's the truth. You want to succeed, you want the promotions, the recognition, the bigger paycheck, and that's normal. The world tells you those things are proof that you're moving forward. But what if the very success you're chasing is pulling you further from God instead of closer to Him? See, most people assume success and God's will automatically go hand in hand. But the Bible shows us that's not always true. Sometimes what looks like success in the world's eyes can be the exact thing that leads us away from God's plan for our lives. And if you've ever felt that tension in the workplace, the drive to climb higher while still wanting to honor Christ, you're not alone. I've been there too. In fact, there was a season in my career where I had to stop and ask myself this exact question. Am I following God's will or just chasing my own ambition? And that moment changed the way I looked at success forever. So in today's episode of Faith Under Fire, Living Out Truth in the Modern Workplace, we're going to tackle this head-on. How to know whether your success is aligned with God's will or standing in the way of it. I know that tension because I lived it. For years in corporate leadership, my career was all about the next milestone, the next title, the next raise, the next opportunity to prove I could handle more. And from the outside, it looked like success. People congratulated me, my team respected me, and my family was proud. But inside, I started to feel the weight of it. Every promotion came with new expectations, bigger targets, longer hours. And the higher I climbed, the more I was told that ambition was the ultimate proof of value. If you want to matter here, you've got to keep moving up. It sounded right. It even felt good in the moment, but I noticed something subtle. The more I chased success, the more I neglected the deeper question of whether I was still following God's will. I'll never forget one particular season in my career. My team had just crushed some of the company's toughest goals. Production was up, efficiency gains were better than expected, and leadership was thrilled. Afterward, I was being praised, even pushed toward the next step up. It should have felt like the biggest win. But instead of feeling proud, I felt this pit in my stomach. Late at night, I'd lie awake and ask myself, why do I feel empty when everyone else is celebrating? Is this really where God wants me? Or have I built my own path and just asked Him to bless it? Because I knew what I had taken to get there. In meetings, the pressure was always about results. Excellence mattered, but so did cutting corners, ignoring ethical concerns, and staying silent about what I believed. And I started to realize how easy it was to justify little compromises for the sake of career progress. That scared me. Because if success required me to quiet my faith or twist my values, was it really success at all? Or was it a warning sign that my ambition was taking me further from God's will? Maybe you felt that too. You're working hard, doing well, maybe even hitting goals others envy. But when you stop and really think about it, you wonder, am I actually walking in God's will, or am I running so fast after success that I've left Him behind? That's the fear nobody says out loud in the workplace, but it's one of the most important questions you'll ever ask. The tension between ambition and God's will isn't new. The Bible gives us two very different stories of success. One shows what happens when ambition is built on pride, and the other shows what happens when ambition is surrendered to God. In Genesis 11, the whole world at that time spoke one language. People lived together in one place, on a plain in the land of Shinar. And they decided to take on a massive project, building a city with a tower so tall it would reach the heavens. But their motivation wasn't about safety or worship. It was pride. They said, let us build a tower and make a name for ourselves so we won't be scattered across the earth. In other words, they wanted to prove their greatness and secure their own future, all without God. Now, from the outside, it looked like progress. They were unified, ambitious, and achieving something impressive. But God saw the danger. He knew that if people kept chasing their own glory, there would be no limit to how far their pride could take them away from Him. So God intervened. He confused their language, and suddenly they couldn't understand one another. Imagine being on a work site where your coworker is giving instruction, but you can't make sense of a single word. The project fell apart, and the people scattered into different groups across the earth. The tower was never finished. What looked like success collapsed, not because building was wrong, but because their ambition was rooted in pride and independence from God. Now let's look at Joseph's story, also in the book of Genesis. Joseph started out as the favorite son of his father Jacob, and that made his brothers jealous. So jealous, in fact, that they betrayed him, sold him into slavery, and told their father he was dead. Joseph was taken to Egypt, far from home, and forced to work as a servant in the house of a man named Potiphar. But even as a slave, Joseph worked with integrity, and God gave him success in everything he did. Potiphar trusted him to manage his entire household. Then came another setback. Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of something he didn't do, and he was thrown into prison. Again, it looked like Joseph's story was over, but even in prison, he stayed faithful. The prison warden saw his character and put him in charge of other prisoners. While Joseph was in prison, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had two officials who were also locked up, and both had troubling dreams. Joseph told them the meaning of their dreams, and what he said came true. That was the turning point. Later, Pharaoh himself had a dream no one could explain, about 7 fat cows eaten by 7 skinny cows, and 7 healthy heads of grain swallowed by 7 thin ones. None of Egypt's wise men could interpret it. That's when someone remembered Joseph. He was brought from prison to stand before Pharaoh. Joseph made it clear, "I can't do this, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." And God did. Joseph explained that the dreams meant Egypt could have 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh was so impressed, not only with Joseph's wisdom, but with his character, that he promoted Joseph from prisoner to second in command over all of Egypt. Joseph was put in charge of preparing for the famine, and because of his leadership, millions of lives were saved. But here's what's so important. Joseph didn't chase that role. He didn't climb ladders or plot his way to the top. Every step of the way, as a slave, as a prisoner, and finally as a leader, Joseph stayed faithful to God. And in God's time, God raised him up for his purpose. So think about these two stories side by side. The people at Babel were united, ambitious, and driven, but their goal was to make a name for themselves. It was pride dressed up as progress. Their success collapsed because it was all about them. Joseph's life, on the other hand, looked like failure most of the time. Slavery, prison, forgotten. But through it all, Joseph stayed faithful to God in the small, daily things. And when the time was right, God elevated him. Not so Joseph could make a name for himself, but so he could serve a greater purpose. His success wasn't about pride, it was about obedience. That's the contrast. One group said, "We'll build our future without God." Joseph said, "I will be faithful wherever God puts me." And the results couldn't be more different. And here's the truth for us. You can be applauded at work, promoted and praised, and still be completely outside of God's will. Or you can feel overlooked, stuck, maybe even treated unfairly, and still be right in the center of His plan. Not all success is the same. Some success is dangerous because it feeds our pride and pulls us further from God. But the kind of success that comes from obedience, even if it takes longer, even if it looks smaller at first, will always last and always serve a greater purpose. So here's the bottom line. Ambition itself isn't the enemy. God created us with drive, with creativity, and with the ability to build and to lead. But ambition without him is dangerous. That's what the Tower of Babel shows us. Success rooted in pride eventually collapses. But ambition surrendered to God, that's what Joseph's story shows us. When we stay faithful, when we trust his timing, when we let him open the doors, our ambition becomes a tool in his hands to serve a greater purpose. So don't hear me say ambition is bad. Ambition is powerful, but it has to be aligned. The question isn't, should I be ambitious? The question is, who am I being ambitious for? If your drive for success is all about making a name for yourself, it will never satisfy. But if your ambition is surrendered to God, it will lead you exactly where he wants you to be. And that's where true success is found. So let me leave you with a few questions to think about this week. Who am I really being ambitious for, myself or God? Would I still feel successful if the promotions or paycheck went away? And what's one way I can surrender my career goals to him right now? Because at the end of the day, ambition without God will always leave us empty. But ambition with God will always lead to purpose.